Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and I think good night for those joining from Geneva. I'd like to welcome everyone back to day 2 of our forum on law and COVID-19, strengthening legal preparedness and response for the future. This is a WHO Western Pacific Regional Office event being hosted by the University of Melbourne. I'm Jonathan Lieberman. I'm an Associate Professor in Law and Global Health at the University of Melbourne in the Melbourne Law School and the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health. I know many of you were with us yesterday. We had a fantastic day. We had sessions on public health and emergency laws and on the use of digital technologies. And we're very much looking forward to our 2 sessions today. The first one will be on engaging the whole of the health system in the COVID-19 response to meet surging demand. And then we'll have a session which is about building and mobilising legal capacity for the COVID-19 response and for legal preparedness beyond COVID-19. And then we'll have a closing session where we wrap the forum up and look ahead. A reminder to those who are joining the forum by Zoom, the event is being live streamed on Melbourne Law School's YouTube channel. It's being recorded and will be posted on the university's website soon after it concludes. So we're going to move straight into session 4, engaging the whole of the health system in the COVID-19 response to meet surging demand. And now I'd like to introduce David Clarke, who's Team Leader, Universal Health Coverage and Health Systems Law at WHO headquarters. Over to you, David.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Welcome, colleagues. Hope we're in for a great session today. We have a great lineup of speakers. First of all, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm David Clarke. I'm actually a New Zealander, so I'm from the Wipro region. I've been in WHO now for about 6 years. Formerly, I used to do a lot of legal work in the Wipro region, so it's lovely to be with colleagues and friends from the region. Today, we're going to look at the topic of engaging the whole of the health system in the COVID-19 response to meet surging demand. And what does that mean? So what that means is, for our work at WHO, is thinking about not just the government actors in the health system, but also the private actors. And it also means thinking about the sorts of legal mechanisms and other governance arrangements that we need to employ when we are working with private actors, because these are different from when we're working with the government, when we're trying to work on the response. What we have found at WHO over the course of the response is quite a mixed situation when it comes to the activities of private actors. Some private actors have been quite helpful and supportive of the government's public health objectives when it comes to the response, and some not so. We have seen examples of private sector actors engaging in poor behaviour in things like price gouging, limiting access to much needed services for COVID. So this whole COVID situation has raised the importance in our minds of looking at how you can govern the whole health system, taking an inclusive governance approach, not just governing the public part, but also governing the private part. And here there are two reasons why we should be doing this. The first reason is that the private sector can actually play a huge part in the response because of their size and scope and scale and their activities. They can bring a lot of resources to bear to help us to deal with the response. And the second aspect, as I said in my introduction, there are private actors who haven't necessarily worked in accordance with the public health objectives of governments in the response. So governments do have a critical role to mitigate and address this situation, particularly in this phase of the response when we are very much focused on providing access to vaccines and other COVID commodities. And when those vaccines are scarce, we can't leave it to the market to decide how to distribute those products. So governments have a really important role here in relation to using legal tools and other tools in relation to the response. So I just wanted to make those very, very quick opening remarks. But now I'd like to pass over to the panel. And we're really lucky today to have such an excellent range of panelists. from right across the region. So we have Associate Professor Bismark from the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health. We have Dr. Nguyen from the Ministry of Health in Vietnam. We have Dr. Siom Kum, the Deputy Director of Legislation from the Ministry of Health. We have Margaret, I'm very sorry for getting mispronunciations. We have Margaret Asumbu from the National Department of Health and PNG. And last but not least, we have Professor Wang from the Health Research Centre in China. So colleagues, thank you very much for taking part in this session this morning. So I'll just pass over to Marie Bismark to kick us off.
Thank you, David, and thank you to Jonathan and the rest of the team who've been organising this forum. I'm Professor Marie Bismark from the University of Melbourne. Just a little bit about myself. So as you can see from my background, I'm a medical doctor. I'm working in psychiatry, and throughout the pandemic, I've been providing mental health care to patients in emergency departments, intensive care units, and COVID-19 wards. So what you'll hear from me today is very much a perspective informed by care at the bedside. I'm also a legal academic. I've recently written a book chapter on patient rights and practitioner responsibilities during the pandemic in a book edited by Ian Freckleton. And I'm a public health researcher involved with the Frontline Healthcare Workers Study, which is the world's largest national survey of healthcare workers from all parts of the healthcare sector, led by Natasha Smallwood and Karen Willis. Today, I'll be sharing some quotes from frontline healthcare workers from that study. So for me, in thinking about a whole of system response to the pandemic, the most important message that I would like to share with you is that many of the problems we've seen as frontline healthcare workers are not new, that they're an amplification of long-standing inequities, both in healthcare and within society. Yesterday, we heard a lot about legal mechanisms that are specifically designed to address infectious diseases and pandemics. And what I would like to suggest to you today is that there are a much wider range of legal tools that can be used to support the response to the pandemic. That what we've seen is that the pandemic has widened existing disparities within society and within the healthcare system, with profound consequences for patients and healthcare workers. Many of the challenges in responding to the pandemic, the ill distribution of resources, an overworked workforce, and worse health outcomes for marginalised communities, these problems were amplified, not created by the pandemic. So just a couple of quotes from doctors who responded to our survey. One senior doctor working in anaesthetics said, "The pandemic has shown up all the cracks in a chronically dysfunctional healthcare system." Another doctor working in an emergency department told us, "COVID hasn't caused any new problems. It has merely highlighted all of the existing inadequacies of the healthcare system." So thinking first about the way in which some of these pre-existing problems relate to health practitioners, I think that three major challenges we saw were insecure employment conditions, problems with workplace safety, and unsafe working hours. So here in Australia, a large problem in responding to the pandemic was the casualisation of the workforce, which meant that nurses and aged care workers were moving between sites and therefore able to take the COVID infection with them between different healthcare providers. I would argue with stronger and more secure employment contracts, we may have seen fewer healthcare workers required to move between sites for casual, insecure employment. A second problem was with inadequate enforcement of workplace health and safety laws in both public and private healthcare settings. Here in Melbourne, we saw delays in the provision of appropriate personal protective equipment to many doctors. So I was working on COVID wards and with COVID patients, before we were provided with fit testing of masks, for example. Some of the people who responded to our survey said that if hospitals had been a mining site or another kind of private industry provider, health workers would never have been allowed to work with such inadequate PPE. The third challenge, and again, this was one that predated the pandemic, was unsafe working hours and an overworked workforce. I was really struck by some of the respondents to our survey. For example, one junior doctor said, even before the pandemic, on good days, we were already stretched. When something like a pandemic happens, we're expected to put in even more. There is no buffer. Another doctor working in palliative care said shortages of staff and resources worsened. The drain on junior staff worsened due to the increased clinical load. The only resource we had that we could increase was personal sacrifice of our own well-being. So I would argue that these problems with workplace health and safety, adequate resourcing, secure contracts for nurses and aged care workers were all problems that predated the pandemic, but were amplified during the pandemic. We also saw the importance of patient rights during the pandemic. And in our urgency to respond to the public health challenges, there was a real risk that the rights of patients and family members could be overlooked in public and private healthcare settings. For example, one really core patient right is the right to culturally appropriate healthcare. And yet we saw delays in the pandemic response reaching culturally and linguistically diverse communities. We see the disparities in immunisation rates between English-speaking and migrant communities. So there, I think greater attention to that patient right of culturally appropriate healthcare would have supported the pandemic response. Patients also have a right to appropriate support. This right was often overridden in the name of public health. I do wonder if one day we will look back and ask whether perhaps we went too far. I read many stories from nurses caring for patients who were suffering or dying alone during the most stringent visitor restrictions during the pandemic. One nurse working in palliative care said, "I am devastated. Our dying patients have been denied access from family and friends. It makes me sick to think these dear people feel alone and families feel so helpless." So again, I think that the right to have support from loved ones when you're unwell in hospital is a core patient right. And I think that as we continue to respond to the pandemic, we really need to ask whether all of the public health restrictions are proportionate and whether there is any way in which we can provide patients with greater family support while still protecting others from infection. The third area in which I think we saw amplification of pre-existing cracks in the healthcare system and in society is in the social determinants of health. Working on the COVID ward, I see the strong intersection between vulnerabilities. Many of our patients who are infected with COVID also have insecure housing, a lack of access to stable income. They may have drug and alcohol problems, disabilities, or not speak English as a first language. And I think that human rights law can play an incredibly important role during the pandemic, but also afterwards in addressing these intersectional vulnerabilities among patients. So for example, one lesson that came out from the pandemic around the world is that in places where people are assured a secure basic income, it's much easier to enforce stay-at-home requirements. Whereas if people are fearful that they won't be able to put food on the table, they're much more likely to continue to work in violation of public health requirements. We also saw the importance of secure housing, that many of our patients who were infected with COVID did not have secure housing or were living in overcrowded homes. Again, that's a really basic human right and a problem that was amplified by the pandemic. And finally, I see the challenges of treating drug addiction as a criminal problem rather than a health problem. We've had real challenges in Melbourne with providing appropriate care to people who use substances who are infected with COVID, without adequate trust in health authorities, it's difficult to achieve the kind of contact tracing and treatment that we need to provide to this group of people. And we really see the importance of a harm minimization approach where addiction is treated as a health problem rather than as a justice problem, and providing appropriate healthcare to these vulnerable groups and community. One doctor who responded to our survey said the people who will do worst as the result of a pandemic are the people who would do worst anyway because of how society is structured. And I remember the writings of Lawrence Gostin, who says there are inextricable linkages between human rights and public health. Human rights require government action to protect individuals from harm and fulfill basic needs. So I think in thinking about a whole of system response to the pandemic, it's so important for us to keep in mind that many of the problems we've seen in responding to the pandemic were not created by COVID-19, but rather they were pre-existing problems that were amplified. In enforcing and supporting those basic rights of health practitioners to a safe and secure work environment, the right of patients to timely access to culturally appropriate care, and the right of everyone living in society to a basic income, secure housing, and an environment in which their healthcare needs are met. Just a final quote from somebody who responded to our survey, who said there are many things we will need to reflect on from this pandemic once we get a chance to catch our breaths. I'm grateful for the opportunity that this forum is providing for us to all catch our breath and begin to reflect on what this pandemic means for our future. Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. That was a really thought-provoking presentation. I mean, I've been working a lot on the legal aspects of the pandemic here in Geneva, and you brought a series of issues that don't often get spoken about in relation to the pandemic, particularly from the point of view of the suffering of patients, the real suffering of patients and the experiences of health workers. So thank you very much for bringing that perspective to the panel today. So we have a slight change in order, I think, just because of the availability of some of the panelists. So the next person we have to speak to us today is Dr. Nguyen. Dr. Nguyen, over to you for your presentation.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, thank you for let me have an opportunity to here to join this panel and I have a chance to share some point of view from Vietnam concerning about the how the legal framework system engage the whole health system to be preparedness and respond to the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Vietnam, I'm from Vietnam, from the Health Strategy and Policy Institute under the Ministry of Health in Vietnam. Vietnam, we have experienced the 4 waves of the COVID-19 pandemic. The 4th wave is still the ongoing one. We also the most severe one has largely impacts on the whole the economic and health sector in the country. In Vietnam, the government has implemented the different strategy to respond to prevent COVID-19 at early stage of the outbreak with the very decisive action at the high level, both from the high level of leadership. Our National Steering Committee had for COVID-19 has been control has been established at early stage of the outbreak since the January of 2020. This steering committee provides leadership and stewardship leadership and governance at a high level of the government. And this committee provides also the very strong mechanism to coordinate and leader of the intersectoral action to prevent and control the pandemic. Vietnam government made the decision to prioritize the health over the economic role. This is a very consistent directive from the highest level of the country leadership. The health sector is the center of the government effort to control the pandemic. Under leadership and government of leadership and the governance of the government, the whole health system has been engaged, has been mobilized, engaged in the health emergency, the preparedness and the response to this include health financing, health information system, health service delivery, human resources, and essential medicine and technology. It is observed that a huge amount of the legal document has been issued to legalize the government response to the pandemic. The Vietnamese policy system respond promptly, proactively, and effectively at the multiple level of the authority from the national to province level, and even province and district and commune level. This from study, it reported that during from the January start of the pandemic, January 2020 to the July of 2020, there was total of the almost 1,000 policy documents related to COVID-19 prevention and control has been issued, and which of that is 150 from the health sector, from Ministry of Health. Different types of legal document has been issued to meet the surging demand for policy response, such as the resolution from the highest level, including the National Assembly and the government, the telegram to address the matter, raising inspection, circular to provide guidance to implement the document issued by the government, decision to solve daily tasks of the health authority, guideline, etc. To implement the legal document has been the issue, and also the good communication strategy is very important to in order to reinforce the implementation of on the legal document. The public is well informed about the legal the rule and regulation issued by the government and the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health informed the public of positive cases and potential exposure and provide guidelines for this disease prevention. The government also provides timely, clear, transparent, and tailored information to community to improve people awareness and understanding on the importance of their responsibility to implement on the rule and regulation issued by the government to prevent the COVID-19. This in the community, this improves the trust of population on the government. During the pandemic, the response not only from the public sector but also the private sector has been mobilized and engaged into the joint effort to control the pandemic. The private sector has provide the resources, including the human resources and also the financial and the medicine, medical supply and the vaccine control the pandemic. So that also that the legal system had been also accommodated with the strong engagement of private sector in the pandemic control. The concerning one of the very critical issue during the pandemic control is about the how to protect the health worker who especially who are at the front line to prevent control and the treatment of the COVID-19 patient. The government resolution issued by the government has to provide that all health staff who engage in the pandemic prevention and response are eligible to have allowance to provide the financial incentive for their effort to prevent and control the pandemic. On the other side, there's also regulation on to provide the reward to the health staff with the greater achievement in pandemic control. So from the what we have from we have experience in Vietnam in general and on concerning with the legal framework development during the pandemic response. There's some we think that there's some key the lesson we think that one for responding to COVID-19 we would like to highlight here. The first thing is the commitment and the determination of the country leader is the prerequisite for the successful of epidemic prevention. And this strong commitment should be need to be the legalized into the legal document, legal system, and the document, legal policy document to provide the leadership and guidance to the whole the society to together to control the pandemic. The second point is the engagement of the entire political system and multi-stakeholder are very critical and in preventing epidemic. And the last but not the least is a strong legal capacity and the legal system is essential to support effective national response to the health emergencies for building a stronger and resilient health system to effectively respond and control any the health emergency or the crisis. So that's all for things I would like to say with you in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. That was a really great presentation. Thanks for highlighting the incredible importance of the whole of society response to COVID-19. And also thanks in particular for highlighting the important role of the political dimension and the importance of giving effect to political leadership through strong laws.
Yeah.
That was a very engaging presentation. Thank you so much. Now, can I invite Dr. Quang from Cambodia to please give his presentation? Thank you so much.
Okay, before we start my slide, I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nguyen, Deputy Director of Legislation Department, Ministry of Health. I would like to share my personal reflection regarding to session for engagement the full of the health system in the COVID-19 response to meet surging demand. Cambodia was one of the first countries to report the COVID-19 when the WHO declared COVID-19 pandemic on March 11. Cambodia had confirmed 5 cases. During the community outbreak event on February 20, 2020, a number of joint commission and legal documents were prepared and approved. The strength in the response of Cambodia to the COVID-19 pandemic was in part due to coordination between government agencies. However, we identify a few areas of improvement that may provide important learning points. While the COVID-19 pandemic is new issue or new problem for preparing health system response for Cambodia. So Cambodia have activated multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary committee to respond to COVID-19 at national and sub-national level to manage public health emergency mechanism and coordination. This includes the formation of the National Committee for COVID-19 led directly by the Senate Prime Minister. The committee is responsible for setting national policy strategy for the COVID-19 response, leading the implementation of the strategic plan for the prevention, control, and management of COVID-19, and responding the associated political, economic, and social impact at all levels. All hands on deck for the task force at the national level, sub-national level, and engagement of private service sector through the implementation along with health management. And the last point, you will see the lesson learned. This is a national level. In early April 2020, the royal government of Cambodia announced the creation of the Inter-Ministerial Committee to combat COVID-19 led by the Minister of Health. CDC, Minister of Health created an Emergency Operations Center coordinated by Department of Communicable Disease and Control. And after we call NIPA, Pasteur Institute, and the Pasteur Institute, and include also the military hospital, will play an important role to serve lab service and including certified health certificate. During that time, 4 national hospitals were set up to treat critical COVID-19 patients. And also 1 new hospital was established for COVID-19 management facility. Referral hospital and health center was transferred and supervising by the capital administration was also prepared in response to COVID-19. In addition, the Ministry of Health has signed MOU with the number of major hotel, restaurant, and school, as well as location for treatment of minor COVID-19 patients, and also as a place for quarantine, including national stadium as well. Other institution in Ministry of Defense. Ministry of Defense has also military, we call a military hospital. The military hospital serves a treatment of COVID-19 and a place for vaccination in providing both civilian and military vaccinated. Other body is a medical volunteer. We call a TIDA, was set up by Prime Minister, have been involving in set up a new location for treatment and sampling of COVID-19, such as the location at the Clarke Beach and in the Iceland Diamond. This volunteer include more than 3,000 health worker volunteers. So until now, all these 3,000, they became a health official directly. Other body we call a National Police Commission. The National Police Commission was a subcommittee on research and surveillance of suspect COVID-19 virus. It also been active in enforcing the law on the individual who violates health and administrative measure. The next committee we call the Sub-National Committee that joined the COVID-19 also with the same approach with the national level subcommittee a subnational committee level to engage the pool of principals in the fighting against COVID-19. It was also being replicated at the provincial level, led by each provincial governor. The committee is responsible for setting provincial strategy for the COVID-19 response, leading the implementation of strategic plan for the prevention, control, and management of COVID-19, and leading and managing the provincial health system or health department at the province. Yeah. The next is the private sector or private health service. During the increasing of positive COVID-19 patients, the royal government had flexible decided the engagement of the private health services to examine and treat the COVID-19 patient. So during this, I would like to share some idea also regarding to working process relating to the system management. Before I said about the lesson learned. So at first we call multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary committee was responsible with COVID-19 at national and subnational level that I mentioned about, and after the CDC responsible. And another flow of the implementation of the health system is surveillance and contact tracing and respond to COVID-19. Contact tracing operation led by Ministry of Health were added by dedicated contact tracing team at the hospital and army hospital, and also volunteer medical team. Laboratory service, it is that I said is responsible by NIPA, pastor, and military hospital. Quarantine measure at the point of trial depend on the reflection, the duration of the quarantine. At first, we spent 14 days, but now the Cambodian the flexible and cut down the day of the quarantine until 3 days, 7 days, and 14 days. 3 days for Khmer and foreign citizens that investment people, 17 days and 14 days for unvaccinated and insufficient vaccinated people. Related to case management, since identification of the first important various phases of travel restriction were implemented. Individual who tested positive was immediately isolated and interviewed for the contact tracing. Infection prevention and control, we also provide the implementation of broadcast by the TV to introduce or to practice a good hand hygiene, avoid touching face unnecessary, mask appropriate, and minimize contact with other when unwell. Seek medical aid at the earliest onset and any respiratory symptom. Especially advised to practice 3 done and 3 does as the government of Cambodia always fit with the all cell phone. 3 done 3 does and mean don't go with the crowded people, don't join a close place or touch each other or shake hand. And 3 does it mean wash hand regularly, wear mask when go outside, keep social distance. It is the government practice, broadcast to the people of Cambodia. And after forest communication management, the task force was transparent and frequent in providing situation update through social media channel and regular press conference. This nationwide communication channel was vulnerable and misinformation. Ministry of Health regularly clarify misinformation and encouraging the public to follow accurate and reliable information on official channel by Secretary of State. Vaccination is provide a free of charge defined by subsidy. It is mandatory for the frontline worker such as health worker, civil servant, armed forces, judge, prosecutor, etc. and prioritize also for the vulnerable and disabled people. Logistics and supply. When the outbreak started, the government declared that it would finance treatment costs incurred by COVID-19 patients in public hospital. Royal Government of Cambodia received financial and material support from rich people and companies when the COVID-19 first started. Legal foundation to law and for some degree and other related decisions were enforced to complement policy measures in managing the outbreak. It declared a national emergency to maintain national security and public order to protect the life and health of the people. It also provided legal basis to enforce social distancing measures such as limitation of mass gathering and holding individuals as well as business owner accountable for violation. Mobilizing the last point is mobilizing resources, human budget and logistic quarantine place such as we has allocated to the subnational level and collect and supported by rich people and other companies also. And all the health workers have to train to wear a PPE properly. Lesson learned. I'm sorry also on this slide that I sent to you. Yeah, it's not reply to the lesson learned from Cambodia. Yeah, so I would like to tell about that directly. Yeah, it's not this slide. Okay. Some lesson learned that the government provided fast and effective response to control the spread of the virus is 4 options, 4 categories. At first, by the implementation with a good cooperation and good coordination according to multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary committee. Second, receive more financial and material support from rich people and companies. Third, strictly adapted and approved COVID-19 regulation, including guidance on diagnosis and management of COVID-19 and on infection prevention and control guidelines. Fourth, established the clear legal framework reduces the possibility of misinformation during crisis and enhance clarity in risk communication. Thank you for your attention, and I'm waiting to learn from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that excellent presentation on the wide variety of areas in which law has become incredibly relevant to the operation of public health system when it comes to COVID-19. It's fascinating in that last presentation to hear about all the different aspects where law has played such an important role in the response. And also thank you so much for highlighting the challenges of addressing these matters when you're dealing with a health system which has more than one level, where you have a very complicated health system in Vietnam, where you have the subnational level, which is also very important. So thank you very much for that great presentation. So now I'd like to pass over to Margaret from PNG. Over to you, Margaret.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, University of Melbourne, Jonathan Lieberman and the team. Thank you, WHO, Genevieve and the team. Thank you everyone for sharing, because we have learned a lot from every personal experiences in their respective countries. I'm Margaret. I'm the legal officer for the National Health Department, Papua New Guinea. What I'll be sharing is I'll be answering the 5 questions, and it will be really based on the experiences that Papua New Guinea have experienced during the global pandemic that has affected the country and the global as a whole. From experiences, we have realized that to attend to COVID-19 public health emergency, it is very important to have a national law that is actually setting a benchmark where it actually allows the whole sector approach to public health emergency. And we have seen that having public health emergency declaration at the national level under the Constitution was very helpful because it actually brought every private sectors, public sectors, industries together to manage addressing the public health issue relating to COVID-19. We also realized that we have to modify the public health laws that we have in the country because the public health laws did not really adequately address the international global pandemic. So we realized that although we had these laws in place, we saw that they had to be modified. We also see that the other laws can also help to support approaches of public health emergencies, and that includes other laws that are regulated by other departments and sectors. And one of them was the Public Finance Management Act, and that was very important to regulate the finances that were coming to support COVID-19 in Papua New Guinea. We also realized that we also need to modify the Public Service Management Act because at that time we had capacity issues because we had to manage the public health issue very effectively, and there were laws that actually gave limitations to that. And Public Health Management Act need to be modified to address public health issues. So we attend to public health matters collaboratively. We also realized that the Procurement Commission Act, which is responsible for procurement of medicines, was a very important act that also came in to support the public health emergency when we were faced with it. And so is the Medical Registration Act. We had supports coming from other countries, and those countries' professionals were required to be registered under the Medical Professional Registration Act. And those were some framework in place that actually supported the whole approach to health sector attending to public health issues. This legislation really needed to have clear roles and responsibilities of each level of health system, reporting, accountability, and there was a really requirement for partnership support in the legislations. We also realized that they should be in the other laws, they should at least provide for public health emergency provisions, which should be also captured under different laws. So then they will also, it would also specify their roles and responsibilities to support public health emergency preparedness. The legal framework support and hindrance to emergency preparedness. Although we had laws that were a bit outdated, and but the laws still provided for some control measures, quarantine measures, and public health measures. But we were fortunate that we had a constitution that actually supported the public health emergency through the declaration or state of emergency, and that compelled all sectors to address public health and private sectors, churches and non-government organizations. We also had the Pandemic Act that was developed in 2020, and that also improved the reporting and accountability and control measures applied to the public health emergency matters. We also had some issues with the hindrance that were faced during that time, or there was because of it was a sudden surprise for the global public health pandemic. There was a bit of confusions of roles, and there was duplications of roles. There was no clear demarcations of the roles and responsibilities of each sector. There was no clear path of reporting, and there was lack of accountability. There was inconsistency in reporting between relevant authorities, and there was lack of staff to actually effectively manage the public health issues that we were faced in the country. Our laws did not adequately address emergency preparedness of a global public health threat. But like I said, although we had all these issues, it really got the team together with the support of the constitutions, with the support of every other health, private sectors, other government sectors, under their own law. They came in and they provided assistance to all the country in terms of trying to provide an effective measurement to public health issue that was faced in the country. Involvement of private sector, it was very relevant for the involvement of private sector. The private sector actually assisted in a lot of ways. They came in big time in actually providing support to assisting the public sectors, and that was through management of public health issues. They provided treatment, transportations. They also provided use of facilities to manage the public health issues. They provided role of vaccinations, sharing of workforce and facilities, coordination, reporting, and accountabilities. So there was, we saw that they came in those matters, but they really need to be in this current lessons learned from the current approach is that they came in a big way, but we need to really strengthen the strategies involving coordination, reporting, and accountabilities. Because the challenges that we faced was that there were policies that were also set by private companies and industries were a bit stringent to public, and we thought those were some challenges that we really need to address adequately through some form of arrangements, agreement, and working closely with different sectors and coming up with the best policies and regulations that will really allow the private sectors and the public sectors to work collaboratively and harmonize service provision. For mental health legal framework, yes, we do have a mental health act. It does provide the directorate, which was very supportive to provide mental health counseling, training to health workers. Although the act did not really specify public health training and counseling to health workers, thank the World Health Organization, it provided guidelines to set up national plan for training and counseling for health workers. So in the country, we have the psychiatrists who are actually running this counseling and training for our health workers, and even providing counseling to patients. And they're actually going out through media and phone calls, and there were times that they have to come face to face to provide these counseling services. So, but we will still, through these challenges that we have faced, the mental health act need to be really amended, modified to really suit current issues that are faced. There's so many mental problems, issues, stress. People are overstressed, staffs are overstressed because there's not enough staff. The new people who are coming out of colleges who've just trained and registered are coming into support. They're coming into support, but they also need to be properly trained and prepared mentally to go in and approach. Yes, we are actually approaching the mental health issues through our mental health act. So we are working closely with lastly, the lessons that we have learned through this is that it is important to have an all government approach because it's a public health issue that is affecting the whole country, and different governments have their own responsibility to do that. You know, sometimes we need to really have these directions coming from the government. So we realize that the whole government approach is very good for an effective partnership agreement specifying roles and responsibilities of both public and private system. We also realize that the international health regulation is to be domesticated into the national public health law. Yes, during the COVID-19 breakout, we realized that the international health regulation was one of our strengths that guided us into how we could manage an international pandemic. And we also realized that international health regulation under our constitution should be domesticated into the law. So it becomes something that's mandatory for everyone in the country to comply with. and it is actually recognized under the national law. We also realized that all other supporting laws, the other laws which not health is regulating, but the other departments are regulating those other laws, they really need to incorporate management of public health emergency provisions. And then it really needs to outline what is expected of them when there's an emergency as such happens. So we can all know exactly how each and every one can cooperate together to manage effectively public health issues now and any other that arises in the future. We also see that we need to have very effective partnership agreement specifying roles and responsibilities of both public and private health systems. Private health sector to work closely with health department to avoid breach of public health requirements. It is very important that because health department is the health agency that's responsible for delivering of health services, public health private sectors need to work very closely so we can work together, so we are all on the same page and we are all working together as a team and providing the country the relevant services to people who need the services. Legislations to also consider human rights requirement under the public health during public health emergencies. Right now we have a lot of issues concerning public health issues versus the private rights. And we have realized that because it's a public health concern, it has tried to impinge on individual human rights by stopping them certain rights that they have rights to go to work, right to pay, right to doing things that it has been regulated. And now we have court cases that have been brought forward and they've actually tried to, there are lawyers that are taking it on now at the moment, and now it's before the judge with the National Court, and the National Court has actually directed our controller under the Pandemic Act, the Health Minister, and the National Executive Council to present before the court on the 16th of November to address this issue. So human rights is becoming an important consideration under such emergencies, and there needs to be clear guidelines as to how we consider public health versus individual human rights, yes. And we need to continue providing training and counseling in the management of health emergency. And this kind of training model should not be only applied to health department, but it has to be also applied to other departments and private sectors, public sectors, and each and every one should be aware of the training that's required for attending to public health emergencies like we have the COVID-19 right now. And there should be counseling, not only for health workers, but they should be also counseling for our patients as well, because there was no counseling from the start. You know, people were a bit distancing themselves away from even COVID patients. But I think COVID needs to be seen as just another disease, and as a responsibility for health workers, we need to be counseled to counsel our patients who are actually there to receive that expert care from us. So we see that those are some lessons that learned, and we need to work closely. Every sectors need to work closely together. Roles and responsibilities need to be clearly demarcated, and we know what to do, so we do not step into each other's toes. We do not duplicate roles and responsibilities, but we all are working together, and we all are working towards a common goal, and that is to make sure that we control public health issues and we effectively manage public health issue, and even in the future, whatever that may happen. From this, we have learned that we need not to just sit back and be complacent, but we need to be very proactive in managing public health emergencies in the country. And a strong legislative framework is something that will contribute to effectively managing public health issues arising in that country. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks for that very careful and thoughtful analysis of how law has both helped with the response in PNG, but also for the analysis of where you've had some problems. Also, thanks very much for highlighting the importance of a whole of government approach to this pandemic and making sure that the Ministry of Health works carefully with other ministries who have an important role here. It's great that you also brought in the human rights dimension, as other speakers have as well, and also the importance of mental health. So thank you. Thanks very much for a really thought-provoking presentation. Dr. Wang, would you like to take the floor, please?
Thank you, David. And well, thank you for the organizers to invite me to participate in this very important meeting. And I really learned a great deal from the previous speakers and the experience from different countries. I benefit a great deal. Now let me share my presentation from the Chinese perspective. I will talk from the Chinese perspective, and because of the limit of time, I will not repeat what the other speakers already eloquently emphasized on. And for example, we need to pull all the efforts, not from the only epidemiologists or the public health organs, but the entire health system. I completely agree with that. The previous speaker, Mary, already mentioned the vulnerable group of people who have greatly affected by the pandemic, and also other persons with chronic disease, with non-infectious diseases, and other kinds of diseases who are actually affected by the pandemic. Therefore, we should pool all the efforts, not from only the public health agencies, but from the entire health system. And in China, the health system, particularly the healthcare service provided by the hospitals and the clinics, the major part of the hospitals are state-owned. Therefore, the government have a great leverage in mobilize the enough efforts from the other hospitals and clinics in order to effectively contain the COVID-19. And I think everyone remembers that at the beginning of the outbreak of the pandemic in China, there was shortage of the manpower, of the physicians, nurses, and also there was not sufficient space for hosting all the patients. So therefore, they were quickly encouraged and mobilized by the government to set up the so-called mobile cabin hospitals to create enough space to take whoever need the healthcare service into these additional clinics and hospitals. So we could say that these efforts need to be gathered not only from the public sector, but also from the private sectors as well. And physicians, nurses who are in the private sectors also participated in the containment of the COVID-19 in China. So what I would like to say is that not only the efforts from the health system, health sectors, we also need to consider the efforts from the entire society. In China, we have an expression, which is that the fighting against coronavirus is a war by the whole people, not only by the doctors, physicians, or health sectors, but by the entire society. And is also called multi-dimensional war against the COVID-19, namely all the sectors, all professionals, or other organizations need to participate in these great efforts to contain the COVID-19. And besides the health sector, we could say there are pharmaceutical industry in which mobilized and expected by the whole society to produce very efficient vaccines and drugs, etc. and also market supply, not only the health equipment, but also daily necessities, and for their food and for their drinks, etc. And also transportation, because it's a vast country, people are moving all the time, and how to really contain the COVID-19 depends on transportation and many other sectors as well. All the social organizations need to participate in this war, and the entire government organs. And for example, at the beginning, we made a suggestion to the Ministry of Transportation and informing them that they should really use their efforts to cut the transmission of the virus through public transportation. So these kinds of participation by all the government organs are really necessary and indispensable. And most importantly, in China, the organ which is interim organ in the period of pandemic was established, which is the Joint Prevention and Control Mechanism, which is the leading and coordinating organ at the central level, and also the similar organs are established at the local level to make the effective mechanics and coordinating organs to really pull all the sectors of the society, all the organs of the government together in order to make effective fight against the COVID-19. And of course, in China, there is a particular political system, which is the leading party, which is the Communist Party of China, which has a great significance in guiding the government and also mobilizing people to engage in the fight of the COVID-19. So I would like to say, probably we could enlarge a little bit, not only engaging the entire health sector, but the entire society, which is really needed. And why law is crucial in response to COVID-19. I will not repeat what the other speakers already eloquently spoken. I just want to point it out, the unique feature of the current pandemic. There are unforeseeable eruption of the new disease. And in China, in Wuhan, in the early stage, and there are no sufficient time for testing, for even to separating the virus. And there was no knowledge of this new virus. So people at the beginning were panicked and didn't know how to deal with that. The health authority quickly mobilized the physicians and the scientists to find out what are the new variants, how to cope with this new virus. But regrettably, still to the present stage, there is no effective medicine, no effective therapy. The vaccine at the beginning for a long time, more than 1 year, there was no effective vaccine as well. But now we do have vaccine available, but they still cannot provide endure effect against the virus. So we are limited by the technology. We are limited by our knowledge. So what are the effective tools or measures for containing the pandemic? And then we recall the historical experience. We find the traditional ways are very much effective vis-a-vis the new virus, which we have no effective drugs and therapies to cope with. So this effective traditional way is actually quarantine. So this is the most effective way to cut off the transmission channels of the virus, and the most reliable way of keeping people safe. So these include blocking the channels of the virus transmission the quarantine or keeping social distances, etc. We wearing the masks in the public. We know all these ways and adoptions, measures, which are not really some high tech and depending on the traditional way. So here, from the legal perspective, we understand that the functions of law include so many, and to delegate authority to the government, to protect the human rights, to, well, provide punishment and the legal ground, etc. We couldn't name all the functions, but considering fighting against the current COVID-19, the law's important function is to regulate people's behavior, to advise people what are the healthy way of participating in your social work, in your, well, professional work, etc. So the function of law is to regulate people's behavior. And then we think that, well, the way currently we are applying are actually changing people's behavior in the public places or in their private homes. So they are hand in hand. They have the internal logics, similar logics of providing norms which will change or regulating people's behavior. So this is why in this current pandemic, law is indispensable from the very beginning, from the privacy, from the other freedoms, from their property rights, etc. We can see that law is very much indispensable. So this is my view, and we need to engage the whole society, not only the health sector, and also law is indispensable. And from particularly the perspective of the current pandemic, and in China, I will not dwell on these parts, and there are different, well, fields of law. Every lawyer knows about it, and Chinese legal system is a whole category. Within it, there are different compartments, different fields of separate laws. Health law is one part of it, but health law contains many subfields as well. And here's the chart from the Chinese perspective. We illustrated that public health law is only one part. It's not the entire of the health law. Health law contains public health law, health care law for individual patients. Public health law concerns the public health. From the legal perspective, there are different fields. And also finance and insurance for health and health products law, including the drug law, vaccine law, etc. So I will not deal with these details, just to give you a general picture of what is the legal structure, what is the importance of health law, and also particularly the public health law in China. In coping with the current pandemic, and China never declared emergency stage, but China declared contingency state. The contingency state is provided by the emergency response law and also constitutional law. In China, there are two kinds of concepts: emergency state, contingency state. For coping or fighting against COVID-19, China entered into contingency state. Even though this is the minute legal jargons, legal distinctions, I will not deal with that. We may use emergency, contingency interchangeably. Anyway, not from the strict legal perspective, but what are the characteristics of contingency stage? And is a particular abnormal stage declared and terminated by the proper authority, namely by the administrative organs. The highest one is the state council, and then the local provincial governments. So they are the authorities who can make decision for declaration of contingency stage. So what are the particular characteristics of this stage? It's abnormal stage. In this stage, many people's rights, citizens' rights, and the rights of social organizations such as enterprises, substantially restricted. So namely, in order to contain the virus, in order to keep people safe, and there are certain limitations has been imposed on citizens, on other organizations. So here we comes the difficult part of public health law, which has been eloquently advocated already by the famous legal law professor, Larry Gostin in the US. In his famous book, Public Health Law, he mentions that public health law organs and authorities and decision makers face an inevitable dilemma, which is you have to make a choice, to make a decision, which have to be based on trade-off. You have to select which are the rights you want to protect the most. What are the rights or interests at the moment need to be suffered a little bit. And the trade-off, I think the speaker yesterday from Singapore already mentioned this term, trade-offs. While making trade-offs, the government gathering more power in its own hands, and the individuals need to be limited in their rights. You have to make this trade-off. What are the general principles you need to have? So it's not a kind of trade-off decision at random. There should be some legal guidance, legal procedures. I would say principle of legality, which contains the principle of legitimacy, whether these measures, authorities are legitimate, and also principle of proportionality, whether the trade-off decision, the kind of quarantine measures actually proportionate in order to protect more benefits and then create less harm.
Yes.
So is time up?
Yeah, sorry, Dr. Wang, I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is a great presentation, but we only have a little bit of time left, and we do want to keep some time aside for discussion.
I understand.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Completely. Can I just finish with another more couple of minutes? And in China, and through the process of containing of the pandemic, and we are actually in the whole process adopting very flexible policies. Namely, we're changing, even this is at a normal stage, but there are different flexible policies has been imposed and adopted. Now, I just want to share the lovely photo in the Disneyland in Shanghai. Just a couple of days ago, there was an eruption of confirmed cases in the neighboring province, and one confirmed patient went to this Disneyland. They landed the news in the evening at 6 o'clock. Within 1 hour, they gave a public announcement. All the people need to have the nucleic acid test immediately. So by the 9 o'clock in the evening, and more than 10,000 people has been tested. And all the close contactors has been traced off. And then there was some immediate measures has been imposed. So this is a kind of more accurate, swift, effective, and scientific controlling measures. And particularly the so-called fall earliness mechanisms. I will not repeat what are the earliest: early detection, reporting, control, and treatment, etc. So China is going to systematically review the current health system, legal system, and gave already a decision by the National People's Congress to revise or to enact to the new laws in the future. And just one more minute, sorry for that, David, sorry for that. And after the pandemic, and we should learn from the historical experience, we may consider further in the bundle of human rights, any kind of ranks or orders of different kinds of rights during the pandemic, which is an enormous danger for the entire mankind, whether the right to health, right of life should be put into the upfront. And also we need to make the government and political leaders legally committed, not only change the law, but they must make the commitment in various ways I will not repeat. And also adopt adequate and proportionate quarantine measures together with the provision of additional service, assistance, protection by the government, and emphasize equally the mechanisms of both preparedness and response. And I say in terms of response, there are a lot of, well, kind of incidents in which the lack of the legal commitment by the leaders, political leaders. So I think this is very much important. And also embrace and implement the idea of one species and one planet and one fair shared future, which is provided by Tedros, the current Director General of WHO, and also which echoes President Xi Jinping's statement, a community of common health for mankind, and in the framework of the community with a shared future. I think this should be firmly adopted. And thank you for your attention. Sorry, I spoke too much. I stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. Thank you for highlighting the importance of making sure that we keep laws up to date. That isn't the laws are just a fixed point in time, that we really do need to learn from this pandemic and make sure that we do keep them up to date for future challenges. I'm sorry, we're going to have to close the session. We've had some excellent presentations today. So thanks to the speakers. So if anybody who'd like to make some comments or pose any questions to the speakers, could you please put them in the chat or in the Padlet? That would be great. So thanks everybody for your attention to the session, and back to Jonathan.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks to all panelists for a fantastic session. I see there are some interesting comments already on Padlet, so I'd also like to encourage people to add to those. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back for the session on building and mobilising legal capacity at 10:50 Manila time. So thanks very much, everyone.